I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and my parents owned a comic store in Tulsa called Sooner Books and Comics. And as a result, comics were, superhero comics in particular, were pretty much a part of my life from the get-go. You know, I distinctly remember going out to the garage, and we had a wall, much like this, a wall of long boxes, and trade paperbacks weren't really a thing in the early 90s. So it was all just single issues, back issues. And I could go in and say, hey, I want to read a full run of Power Man and Iron Fist, and pull out a full run of Power Man and Iron Fist and read it overnight. So they were always around me at every point in my childhood, up until I was probably 14 or 15. And then I got really interested in playing guitar, and I got really into being a guitarist. And then my dad passed away in '98, and we decided to sell the store. And so I got back into, like, as we're going through stock trying to decide what to get rid of, I got back into comics and read, and started reading again, and I was probably 17 or 18, and then they've been a part of my life ever since. The Flash. Sadly, like, I stopped reading The Flash the month before Mark Waid took over, and so I missed Mark Waid's entire run. So when I got back into comics a few years later, I went back and picked all that stuff up. The Justice League, I was always a big Justice League fan, even through Justice League Detroit, which everyone hates. X-Force. I even when I wasn't reading comics, I went to the comic store every month and bought X-Force, because they were my guys. Cannonball, Sunspot, where it's at. And those were probably the big ones. And then just I would pick up things here and there. I loved Longshot. He was my favorite Marvel character, and so any appearance of Longshot, I would hunt down and find. And then when my dad passed away, I started collecting Wally West appearances, because I got back into comics, and I got back into Wally West because of Mark Waid. And then from that, just found an issue of Starman that had Wally West, and started reading Starman. And then that became like the be-all, end-all comic for me for a long time. And then I dropped back into the classics as I got older, and you do your Watchmen, you do your Dark Knight Returns, but like when you're a kid, you don't really understand why those books are important or matter in the grand scheme of things, or how influential they were at the time. So I was not super into them when I was a kid. Like, I remember reading Watchmen when I was 10 or 11 years old and being like, this is terrible. And then, eventually you age up to a point where you understand what Alan Moore is trying to say in that book, and what he's doing in that book with the storytelling and the craft of those books. The ups of being a comic writer are working with characters that you love, whether you created them or someone else created them. Working with some phenomenal artists, and seeing what your prose script generates with penciled drawings. Seeing that transition from 3 or 4 lines of prose into a finished drawing, inked, colored, the whole bit, that's very rewarding for me. I like the craft of writing comics quite a bit, and being in a position where I get to continually work on that craft and try to develop that craft is rewarding for me. So that's probably your ups. Your downs, I mean, as a freelancer, like, when you do freelance work, sometimes you are flush with work, and other times work is lean. And that's probably the down, is not really knowing when or where that next paycheck could come from. And that can be stressful. That can be very stressful on you and your loved ones. I don't know. There aren't a lot of downs. It's a pretty good job, and it's a job I enjoy, and it's a career that I'm happy to have and feel very blessed to have. a lot of what I write is me channeling my fears and or happiness or joy through those characters, and so a lot of the time, you know, like Supergirl, so much of what I wrote in Supergirl was about not feeling like you can live up to the bar that your siblings, older siblings, have set, and dealing with the death of a parent. And those were two things that were extremely personal to me, and so that, you know, I channeled all of that and all of my thoughts about that into the work in Supergirl. And Vibe was about trying to stay positive in an unbelievably negative and cynical world. And even in the face of overwhelming odds and you know, assured defeat, Vibe always kept that smile on his face because he's a very positive character, and he can make, you know, like, to him the mountain always seems like a molehill, and he can make it through no matter what. Like, he believes in the goodness of people, and as a result he gets himself into a pretty crummy situation, but because of his belief in the good of people, that bad situation changes around him because of him. And that's something I really believe in. Like, I believe that if you remain a positive person in a cynical environment, you can help affect that change. And the hope is that cynicism and negativity never overwhelms the positive person and crushes them, which can happen, totally happens all the time, but for me it was important to tell a story where that didn't happen, and where Vibe's presence inspires other people to get out of that, you know, especially Agent Gunn, to get out of that cynical situation, and help come to grips with the world that they live in. Working with Jeff's always awesome. You know, Jeff is a master of craft and character, and Jeff was my mentor, and he trained me to write comics. He trained me to write his superhero comics, and you know, I always feel very blessed to go in and work with him one-on-one. He and I, especially for Vibe, the transition out of, he and Andrew Kreisberg were in that book, and then I came in at issue 3, and so for the transition, I was meeting with Jeff every couple days and going over, like, where to take that character and his thoughts on the character, and making his version of the character mesh with the version I knew that I was going to be writing or trying to portray. So it's good. I always feel like it takes a lot to get in because his schedule's a mess, but it's always good to sit in on a meeting with him and talk through character or story. And anytime I pitch him a story, he always has the fix that elevates it a whole other level. And he's always very complimentary. Like, it's a great story, but here, what if you did this? And it always, like, kicks me up to the next level, and it makes me want to write the best story possible.